Welcome everyone to this IAQM webinar on the quest for the rating of indoor environmental quality, the TAIL rating scheme. This webinar will introduce a new rating scheme for indoor environmental quality called TAIL. We are delighted to be joined by Pavel Vargotsky, Professor at the Technical University of Denmark. Pavel has more than 25 years of experience in research on human requirements in indoor environments. He's best known for his seminal work demonstrating that poor indoor environmental quality affects the performance of office work and learning. As always, there'll be a chance for questions at the end of the presentation, so please do submit these in the Q&A option at the bottom of your screen at any point during the presentation, and I'll ask these on your behalf later. So yeah, thanks everyone for logging in, and I'll now hand over to Pavel.
Well, thank you very much. Good afternoon to everyone from Copenhagen, and good afternoon to everyone wherever you are on the other side of the screen. My name is Pavel Vargotsky, and thank you very much for the introductions. I have been working in Denmark for more than 30 years now, originally coming from Poland. Graduating from Warsaw University of Technology, but completing all my career, research career and PhD in the Technical University of Denmark. My major interest is how indoor environmental quality affects humans, and my research has been developing over the years throughout the different topics, starting with the understanding how we perceive our quality, and then understanding how our quality affects our cognitive performance, work performance, later learning, looking at also thermal effects on learning and work performance. Recently, I have been looking also on how our quality and thermal effects thermal environment affects our sleep quality. Maybe that will be another topic to be discussed. Over the years, I have been trying to disseminate the work that I have been doing with bigger and less, big success to the industry. Some of the work has been implemented in some guidelines and in some standards, but not all of it. And not all of it can be very much, disseminated and go through the actual practical applications. And I have been thinking about what would be the reason, because we provided very strong arguments, also economic arguments, on the positive effects of implementing some of the solutions and some of the theories that we have been developing. And not only us, but all our collaborators and also independent groups around the world. And in the end, I realized that probably one of the important, limitation here, our inhibiting factor for that is that we simply somehow overlooked developing of a proper rating scheme for indoor environmental quality. That is only my opinion, but I believe that that probably could be one of the explanations why it is difficult to demonstrate something that is basically invisible. So today I will take you on a journey to how to develop such a rating scheme, and present to you the reasons why the rating scheme is important, and then focus on some of the aspects of that, and then introduce to you the one of the rating schemes that was recently developed. And maybe, hopefully, in that format, or in the other format, or the other rating will be soon accepted in the practical applications. So my presentation will be not very academic, and I will just go first through some of the most important, definitions, because the most important definition is, what do we understand by indoor environmental quality? What you see to the left is actually the traditional understanding of indoor environmental quality, which has 4 components, starting with the thermal environment, acoustic, light, or luminous environment, and then indoor air quality. That is traditional way of looking at what is the indoor environmental quality, though in the last years, there have been more and more focus on 2 additional aspects that I will not spend much time about today, but I think I would like to somehow flash it for you. One is the human behavior, or rather understanding human behavior and allowing people, or providing the environment with the solutions that allow people to adjust and modify their environment according to their preferences and needs. And then contact with nature, which is called biophilia, which is here, of course, light, or the, daylight, basically, and access to the views, plants in the building and outside the building, and so on and so on. So all those elements constitute basically the modern looking at the indoor environmental quality in my eyes. And then if we look at the effects of indoor environmental quality, and if we think about a healthy building, a building that is basically thriving, is providing the conditions for occupants to, in which they feel, well, and then there is no risk for health. Basically, we know how to establish such environments. In a sense, there is enough evidence in the scientific literature to tell us about how those different components of indoor environmental quality affect humans. And this is just few examples here. Let's look at the thermal environment, for example, where we know that it affects comfort, cognitive performance, and sleep. Cognitive performance meaning work performance and learning. And that has been documented by different independent groups, not only by our group. And then, so this is a sort of a summary of what we know. And then if we look at the indoor air quality, for example, we know again that it's health conditions, again, work performance and learning, and sleep. And there is enough information for creating a visual and acoustic environment. Why I'm thinking, mentioning air quality and thermal environment here? Well, first of all, I would like to say that if we think about all those components, there are three components that we can perceive or see or hear. I mean, we know that it's warm, we know that it's bright or dark, or we know that it's noisy or quiet, but we really don't know whether the air is good or bad. I mean, how do we know now, or wherever you are, that there are no toxic pollutants? How do you know that there is no infectious pathogens in the air? This is something that is invisible, and this is probably the most invisible parameter among all those components of indoor environmental quality. So this is very important to understand that this is why it seems like, although we see, although we feel, although we hear, it would be nice to somehow rate what are the combination of those parameters that actually provide the best conditions for people living in buildings. And in buildings, is now our new ecosystem, basically, where we spend more of the time of our life, and mostly these are residential buildings and basically our bedrooms, but also public buildings would be considering about 20% of all the time that we spend during our lifetime. So this is an important exposure pathway to all of those parameters that I have been mentioning. So there have been many various indicators that have been considered for characterizing those components. So we've been looking through those parameters and then trying to identify whether there would be standard parameters or whether there would be some parameters that have been used more often or more frequent. And there are, but in the end, we found out that if you look at the literature, if you look at the standard certification schemes, there is no sort of like consistency or coherent use of the parameters. There are some parameters that are always used, but most of the parameters could be different. And in the end, we figure out that there could be up to 90 different indicators or parameters that are measured normally or quantified in order to characterize indoor environmental quality. And again, they are not sort of like, there is no any parameters that, that are formed into a certain rating scheme. That is really quite surprising in a sense that we have not been able to develop that rating scheme, because Method of rating, methods of ratings are very popular and frequent in other disciplines, for food, for energy here, and even outdoor air quality. There are indices or parameter or labeling schemes that allow you to know whether your house is using a lot of energy or whether air quality outdoors is polluted or not, or what is included in the food that you buy and whether it's healthy or not healthy. So in sense, for indoor environmental quality, if there is non-professional person or any person, lay person that wants to know that, they cannot have a sort of a meter and say, okay, in this building, I probably expect that indoor environmental quality will be moderate or high, of the high quality, or maybe, very poor quality. We don't have that rating. So, or not standard rating. And there have been why it is important. The important is because, of course, it provides an incentive for improvement of indoor environmental quality. If we don't know how the environment is, how can we improve it? It will create a benchmark. It will monitor performance of buildings, will provide input to control, to energy simulations, and also to economic calculations. How do I know whether there would be any negative or even positive consequences for the aspects of health, absence rate, or even work or learning if I don't know what the quality of environment is? And then it will demonstrate invisible. So again, I'm coming back to air quality. If we don't know whether air quality is good and bad, a rating scheme will tell us that the air quality is, or maybe the environment in buildings creates no risk. And finally, it will raise the awareness. I mean, pandemic that we want to forget very quickly about, it actually raised the awareness of many people that there is something invisible that we have to hide against and wear the masks and stay home and so on and so on. So that rating scheme would also provide that kind of awareness, increase interest in the aspect of the exposures that are occurring in the buildings. There have been some attempts to develop recently indoor environmental quality, and I provide you with two which are probably European sort of like inclination. There are many in the certification schemes that building certification schemes that I don't want to go through because they have been decided based on the aspects of the economy and the economic interest for the councils that are actually developing them, and they change actually the rating of environmental quality depending on the focus, specific focus. But here we are. I want to give you an example of two, probably independent one. One is IAQ Compass. It actually was developed before pandemic, and it provides several levels of indoor environmental quality, and depending on the score, and each of the parameter is scored according to a certain classification. It is an asset rating. Asset rating in a sense that meaning that you try to estimate what the building can deliver if operating properly with respect to indoor environmental quality. And then depending on different scores, which there is credits for each score, the building is classified between class A and G, following the similar classification as for the energy. Energy also has those labels. And it was developed as a consensus between the research practice, and it was developed in Denmark actually by another university. And this is an example how it is for the different parameters has been done. This is for the air quality parameter, IAQ, and then you can see for the air quality, the four domains are considered is outdoor air quality, ventilation and materials, activities, and occupant adaptability to the environment, and then possibilities for them to adapt the environment. And then there are certain weights. Those weights are based on the decision that has been taken, or survey among the experts, and also the decision of the group that developed that. And then there are certain criterion weights. So basically, this is sort of a similar approach to the approach that has been or is used actually in certification schemes, and trying to look at a particular aspect of the environment, trying to assess what the building can deliver. The other one that has been developed is called levels, and it has been developed actually, it was developed before pandemic again, and during pandemic, the European Commission has actually reduced the interest, or reduced the focus, and now it's coming back, and the levels will be coming back. It's a sort of a framework of core sustainability indicators for office and residential buildings. It contains 3 parts, on which they introduce those indicators, and then in part one part is showing how to make the performance measurements. And there are several indicators which they call macro objective, and they are related to, let's say, greenhouse gas. Here you can see, and then circular economy, efficient use of water resources, sort of a similar approach to any certification scheme, and it also includes the element of healthy and comfortable spaces. In those healthy and comfortable spaces, there is an indoor air quality and thermal environment only, and acoustic and visual environment is only to be considered in the future. So basically, what is estimated is the estimated good indoor air quality based on the selection of building materials and the levels of ventilation or carbon dioxide as a marker of ventilation, and then the time above a certain temperature to avoid the overheating in a building. So, coming back to the rating scheme, I was putting a lot of arguments why it is necessary. So again, I want to repeat that it is a significant barrier holding back innovation, because in a sense, if you don't have anything to compare with, how can you actually develop? And then it actually allows for developing own method of benchmarking the quality of indoor environment. I mean, if there is no standard method, you can actually benchmark it and do it on your own. And this is why I showed you before that there were nearly 100 parameters that are measured when the indoor environmental quality is characterized in buildings, and no standard method. And then also, because it is not demonstrated, we can undervalue the quality of indoor environmental, the quality of indoor environment. So we don't have a meter here. So then we can say, well, the environment is okay, no one is, hurt, and so on. And then basically it's an invisible danger, but we don't know whether it's at all a danger. So it is necessary, and also it's necessary because of 2 reasons, which will be specifically important in Europe. And the first reason was, which is now a part of the new directive, is that basically already in the amendments to the European EPBD directive, which is Energy Performance of Building Directive from 2018, that amendment already required that long-term renovation strategies should establish an evidence-based estimate of expected energy savings and wider benefits, such as those related to health, safety, and air quality. So already 6 years ago, the Commission was aware that there is an important element that needs to be developed when we talk about the buildings, which is characterizing environmental quality in buildings. The APBD did not define how to characterize it, but basically said that it is important. And basically in the newest directive, this is the revised version of the directive from April 2024, which will be in force from 2026. There is an Article 13, but there are also other articles that basically define clearly that member states shall set requirements for the implementation in order to maintain a healthy indoor climate, adequate indoor environmental quality standards in buildings. Basically, it's saying that there has to be a measurement of indoor environmental quality in a building, and then it should be monitored. This is, of course, applying only to the buildings that are new or undergoing the significant retrofit, energy retrofit, but still, this will be all buildings in the future. So basically, the Commission is seeing the urgency of that, but it's not telling us how to do it. And the reason for that is that basically that is not a part of the traktat. So each member country has to, or member state has to develop their own methodology. So with that, can we propose something? So we have been working in a project, European project, trying to identify the arguments or incentives for improving the rate of the energy retrofits of buildings in Europe. Basically, the conversion of buildings into the low energy buildings or low emission buildings is actually going very slow. So the European Commission is actually looking for the strong incentives to do it. And that one of the incentives is to look for the so-called non-energy benefits. Those non-energy benefits are the benefits that are actually occurring because of the changes in the energy performance of a building, and if they are quantified, they can provide an additional argument. And one of those methods of quantifying those non-energy benefits is actually to characterize indoor environmental quality in a building. Because if we know the building before retrofit and after retrofit, the indoor environmental quality, and if we can demonstrate that indoor environmental quality gets improved, then it can be actually converted into the economic benefits. And I will not show how it can be done today, but I will tell you how you can actually possibly measure indoor environmental quality. So in that project, we were looking for a rating scheme that maybe was developed at there were plans to develop such a rating scheme, and actually such a rating scheme, we realized that actually such a rating scheme was not developed. So we decided to develop our own rating scheme, and we call that tail rating scheme. Here's the article that was published during pandemic, maybe has been overlooked. It's an open access, which actually describes the rating scheme. The rating scheme is composed, built of 4 components of indoor environmental quality that I mentioned in the beginning. It's the thermal environment, which is T, acoustic environment, which is A, and then I is the indoor air quality, and L is a luminous environment. And each of those, and then overall rating of the indoor environmental quality is a Roman number, which is in the middle of the scheme. So basically, when you look at the scheme, you learn about the quality of each of the components and the overall quality of the indoor environment. So for those 4 components, basically have 4 classes that are defined by different colors, and from red to green, red, orange, yellow, and green, which red is the lowest quality level and the green is the highest quality level. And we follow the standard EN 16798. And actually, in the entire development of the scheme, we did not want to develop our own new method of measurements. The whole idea was to sort of put in the framework the existing methods that have been there into some framework, and that framework is called TAIL. But also we wanted to develop a performance metric, a metric that actually tells us how the building is performing. And the reason for that is that, of course, like with the energy calculations or energy retrofits of buildings, we know that there is a gap between the predicted and actual use of energy. We see that in the buildings that are retrofitted, the energy use is sometimes much higher than the one that you predict because of the changes in behavior of the occupants of the building very often. And then we also didn't want to create that gap here. So rather than looking at what the building can deliver, like the compass, IQ compass that I showed you before, we developed the scheme that actually is based on the performance, the actual performance of the building under use. And then based on the quality of all the components, what we do is we define the overall quality of indoor environment, which is from 1, 2, 3, 4. 1 is the highest, 4 is the lowest. And the lowest, the quality is the lowest among the components. And that has been also discussed whether it should be done. So in the example that you see here, air quality has the red color. So basically the overall quality of the environment is also red and 4. And in the other approaches, what people do, they try to take an average or weighted average or something like that to estimate the quality of indoor environment based on the components. That is done, for example, in some of the certification schemes and so on and so on. But here, the reason for why it has been decided in that way was that we wanted to create a strong incentive to improve and not compromise any of the parameters. We do not know, actually, there is no information in the literature on the importance of all those 4 parameters to our health, for example. So if we look at our health or the hazards that are generated on us by thermal environment, acoustic environment, luminous environment, and indoor air quality, it's very difficult for us to say which is more important, which is less important. So we agreed that all of them are important and none should be compromised. And therefore, we decided that the rating is actually the worst among the 4 components. And then to characterize those components, we selected 12 parameters. We wanted to select less, and I will tell you why it ended up in 12. But we wanted to select as few as possible, and knowing that because it's the first level of, or the first attempt to develop a metric, in order for the metric to be adopted in practice, it cannot be too complicated, but it also has to provide a strong and trustworthy measurements. So we decided to select the parameters that best represent the indoor environmental quality, that are actually have reference values in the standards or the guidelines, and also that can be measured fairly simple in practice. If we were to select 25 parameters, or parameters that would be, for which we would have to develop our own reference reference or benchmark levels, or that would be difficult to measure or expensive to measure, I don't think that the rating scheme would be adopted. It doesn't mean that the rating scheme cannot be developed further, but in order to get implemented, we need to compromise or make ensure that that we, without compromising the quality, we need to have it fairly simple and crude in order to be adopted. So for the different components of the tail metric, we decided that basically we need to have an indoor temperature for characterizing thermal environment. And some people were asking why not operative temperature and airspeed. Airspeed is difficult to measure. Operative temperature in many of the modern buildings basically will be the same as indoor temperature. Operative temperature is to take into account the radiant heat. And then noise level for the acoustic. There are other methods of quantifying the negative effects of acoustic environment. But noise level or the sound tension level is probably the one that is prevalently used and is also standardized. This is why we refer to it. And then I will first talk about L light. So here we decided to have daylight factor in luminance. And then we understood the importance of the daylight and connection to, to outdoor environment. So this is why we included daylight and illuminance. And you can see only for those 3 components, we have only 4 parameters. But the rest of the parameters, 8 parameters, are for indoor air quality. Indoor air quality is probably the most difficult to characterize. And I will come back to this in a moment. I don't want to take time now, but just to say that we decided basically on those 8 parameters to best characterize indoor air quality with respect to the pollutants that are generated indoors and the methods for removing those pollutants from indoor environment. And these pollutants will be formaldehyde, PM, for example, radon. And then CO2 and ventilation rate, CO2 as a marker of ventilation and ventilation rate, and visible mold. Also humidity, which is actually telling us about the risks of having a mold in a building. And then also characterize the building, the pollutants that are coming from outside, such as benzene and PM 2.5 as well. So this is why we have this long list. Among those 12 parameters, all 10 parameters are measured, and then one is modeled, is a daylight factor. Daylight factor can be measured, but you need to have a specific conditions of the clouding and so on, so it should be modeled. And then visual inspection is for the visible mold. So basically those 12 parameters should be measured, and for each, and those 12 parameters apparently are not very much different from what is already in use. So if you basically compare it with the standard EN 16798 or the levels, or even a well standard, basically all 11 parameters are included in those documents. And then if you look at other certification schemes in Europe that are in use, basically there are many of those parameters that are included. So basically, as was also the principle or idea of using the tail is to basically to have the parameters that are already placed and used. So this is basically documentation of that, what I mentioned. Now then for each of the parameters, we describe the ranges of those parameters. So which levels they should be in order to be in a green or the best category of quality, and then which levels that cause that basically are in the red category. And that is for every single parameter. So this is an example for indoor air quality, but we have also for thermal, we have also for acoustic, and we have for daylight. We also developed the protocol because we understood that there has to be a protocol. So how to make the measurements, when the measurements should be made, in which locations the measurements should be made, what instrumentation should be used, and so on, and how to determine the final category of air quality, of indoor environmental quality, based on the measurements that are done in different locations. So all of that is actually described in the paper, and we understand that it is actually a protocol that can be used. So that was our idea. We didn't want to develop some theoretical approach, but something that is pragmatic and can be adopted immediately. And then we did a feasibility studies. And when the metric was developed, we only made on two types of buildings, an office and a hotel building. And then we performed the measurements there. And then we found out that the metric is actually can distinguish between the different parameters, and then can distinguish between the different buildings. Just to let you know that we are now completing we have completed the measurements in 6 buildings, office buildings at our university campus. In altogether, about 60 different spaces, rooms, where we took the measurements. And now we are also looking at the different aspects of the, basically trying to understand how the tail rating scheme is performing, and we'll be publishing this soon. So it's actually, we provide more and more evidence on the usefulness of use of that rating scheme, and more results will be coming. Here I just tell you that basically we learned that actually this rating scheme was very useful. But once we published that, many people were just saying and asking us, well, but of course you look at the building that is completed and in use. What about if I'm sitting at the drawing board and I want to make a renovation of a building, or I want to make a new building? How can I predict what would be my tail in a building? So basically, in a sense, coming back to the idea of what the building can deliver, we developed the sort of a tool that is called PredictTail, which allows the designers and architects and engineers to assess the decisions that they make during construction or during design or of new building or the retrofit of the building. So basically how it will influence the indoor environmental quality. So basically this is a method for rating simulated indoor environmental quality, which have the same elements as the elements of indoor environmental quality, of traditional tail, but it will not guarantee you that you will have the same tail in the actual operating building. It will only help you. It's a helping tool during the design of the new construction or the retrofit. We actually ran the feasibility study, basically simulating the different components of tail using the different simulations tools which are mentioned here, but any other tool can be used. And basically we had a base scenario that is condition of the building before renovation, and then we had two energy retrofits, so intermediate energy consumption and low energy consumption, so only this, and then we made also the retrofit with respect to indoor environmental quality, and we actually showed that the rating scheme is able or can actually discriminate those different scenarios. So it can discriminate the best scenario from intermediate scenario and the base case scenario. In case the best scenario is like going for the low energy house or low CO2 emission house or a building, or going for the best quality of environment. So basically we documented that this rating scheme is can be used. And then the rating scheme was developed mainly having offices and also hotels in mind, because that was the original project. And we asked ourselves, can we do the similar rating scheme for schools, or whether the tail in the format that was developed would apply also for schools? And then what we did is basically we look at the parameters that are measured in schools, and this is an example of the parameters that have been measured in schools, and the publication where we actually document what parameters are measured in classrooms with respect to indoor environmental quality. And we realized that there will be two parameters that may be overlooked in the original tail. If we think about schools, that would be one, will be reverberation time, because there is a oral communication between the teacher and the students. And then there will be one pollutant that is actually coming from outside. And many schools are naturally ventilated, where basically students and teachers open the windows. So it's a nitrogen dioxide. And our focus on the nitrogen dioxide was because the World Health Organization air quality guidelines actually looked very carefully at that parameter in the new update of the guidelines. So, and this is why we thought that maybe the nitrogen dioxide should be strongly considered this, and particularly because it is important for children. And then we applied this new tail for schools on the data that was collected in France, incomplete, unfortunately, for all tail parameters, but some of those. So basically it was 308 schools and 600 classrooms. And then here what you have is the results, and also the illustration of how important and powerful tail is. Because basically what you see here is you have 4 levels of indoor environmental quality with respect to all the components of indoor environmental quality in those schools. And you'll see this is the quality of thermal environment. There is some discrimination between the schools. This is acoustic environment. Again, some discrimination. This air quality, which you see most of them are red, and then again. But basically what you see here is you can actually say which schools require which of the conditions to be improved. So that is actually a powerful message that is sent by tail, because it's providing you with this information. So then, so what is the tail of tail, as I call it? It is a framework for rating components and overall indoor environmental quality. It allows comparisons across the entire building stock, because the same measuring tool is used, and it is a performance metric, and there is no arbitrary credits. We are not giving any credits. We refer to the existing standards and guidelines. And there are no compromises or trading between the indoor parameters, different components of indoor environmental quality. The worst is defining the quality of the indoor environment. And it's grouped by design by expected to increase investor interest, and then is designed for any of the different types of spaces. What are the perspectives and challenges? Of course, the biggest challenge is the air quality. And I know that I'm running out of time, but I just want to mention this important parameter. So here, air quality is the biggest challenge of all the 4 components of indoor environmental quality because it's invisible. So air quality contains gaseous pollutants, particulate matter, and biological agents. And then there are many different metrics that have been applied to basically, or indices to characterize air quality. And the most tool that were used actually today is a ventilation rate. So high ventilation rate, meaning the better quality, or carbon dioxide. Actually, carbon dioxide is becoming the one that is mostly popular. But if we look at the WHO air quality guidelines, there are several other parameters that have to be considered. And these are PM 2.5, PM10, ozone, NO2, SO2, and CO. And look at those parameters, they are not mentioned in the mostly used indices of indoor air quality. Many of those will have their origin outside, so the ambient air, but the buildings are not tied. There will be many, many buildings that basically, which are untied. And then whenever we open door, window, and so on, we will probably, those contaminants will basically penetrate indoors. And for the air quality, we will never basically know all the chemicals that are in the air. I think among the thousands of chemicals that are in trade today, only 1% is characterized for the toxic, and there is more and more coming. So it's very difficult, basically, to characterize all of them. So there could be different ways of characterizing, and then have been proposed some based on the harm that is used. It's called a DALI concept, disability adjusted life years. It's basically to look what harm is created by different pollutants. And looking at that approach, these are the pollutants that have been considered. And then there is recently a paper that was published in the Policy Forum in Science that actually proposed PM 2.5, CO2, and CO, as well as ventilation rate as the parameters to characterize indoor air quality. Indoor air quality also needs to include the parameter that is related to infection risk, because infection risk and most of the respiratory infection is actually airborne. So airborne pathogens. So basically, when we talk about air quality, we need to also think about how to protect against infection. And these are the parameters that are included in TAIL, including a nitrogen dioxide for schools. And basically, they cover all the parameters that I have mentioned earlier. So basically, what we have in TAIL is probably the most up-to-date list of the pollutants that would characterize indoor air quality. And this is, again, indoor air quality, we cannot sense there is something toxic. We cannot sense there are pathogens in the air, and so on and so on. And we don't have a one metric that can characterize, like for the thermal environment acoustic. So there has to be that long list of parameters. And this is the only reason why there is a long list of parameters. Now, when we speak about indoor environmental quality and air quality, we have to also think about other domains, how they influence our responses. And this is about responses, psychology related responses. And then I want to flash here the information that we also started to work on, and then it will be coming soon, some of our new research that is actually trying to combine the traditional indoor environmental quality parameters, or the domain that is called here on this scale, mental and physical health, with other domains that characterize our life quality and how important they are in the context of our life quality. And that is the scale or index that was developed by Harvard, and it's called Human Flourishing Index, which characterizes 6 domains that WISP psychologists who developed that, which characterize different aspects of life and life quality. And among those is the meaning and purpose of life, character and virtue, close social relationships, but also mental and physical health. So what I'm talking about is only one element of a much larger picture that we need to also see this in that context. So what are the perspectives for TAIL? And that will be coming to the conclusion is we want to validate it and extend to other buildings, of course. And then we are developing a TAIL meter. We try to build one, but we identified recently the rating or the sensor box that actually contain most of the TAIL parameters. And then we were also considering using additional or new parameters in TAIL once the current TAIL is accepted. And then we also try to develop siblings of TAIL, like occupant TAIL. So looking at the sensations of the occupants and compare them with the measurements, and also thinking about how the buildings should, the resilience of the buildings and so on. What is the most important for us is to look at the economic value associated with quality levels of TAIL. So basically, we would like to characterize the TAIL based on harm quantification. So each of the component of TAIL can create harm to us. That could be temperature, maybe a harm would be that we perform less well or sleep poorly. Sound, again, maybe we sleep poorly or some other parameters and so on and so on, and basically put the economic consequence or benefit that is associated with certain level or achieving a certain level of TAIL. That will provide an additional incentive to further develop the environmental quality and then improve the conditions in which we spend most of our life. So in summary, TAIL and Predictor provide a complete tool allowing characterization of IAQ in buildings. They are expected to become a standard method of benchmarking IAQ in buildings when applied. And I have been discussing it with the European Commission, but whether it will happen in that format or in a different format, and whether that would be only a sort of inspiration to develop another way, we really don't know. But there is a strong push towards developing those rating schemes, and we believe that they expect to stimulate actions leading to general improvement of the indoor environmental quality. In my presentation that I believe will be shared afterwards, or in the recorded version, you'll see there are references to the papers that we published on the particular topic that I referred some of those in the my presentation. So I'll stop here. Thank you very much for your audience. And now I'm open to any comments and any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Pavel. That was really interesting. We are quite a bit over time, so I'm just going to jump straight into the questions that we've already got from the audience. So Pete asks, I wonder if TAIL should include ozone, especially offices where photocopiers may produce ozone. And he also says the WHO guidelines for PM changed in 2021 from 10 to 5. Should this change be reflected in TAIL?
Right. That's correct. I believe that ozone should be considered very carefully. The problem with ozone is that it will react very quickly when entering the spaces, so that the level of ozone to be decided, it can be actually close to zero, but it can be through the reactions with the surfaces and other pollutants in the space. So basically, just measuring ozone may not provide all the evidence, but certainly ozone should be flushed in the TAIL in some way or another, because of the potential of generating some other byproducts when it is present, and also because it in itself, ozone can create a harm to health. So I agree with that. That will be rather difficult to measure and interpret the data. So we are thinking about it, how to do it, but maybe next versions will certainly include that. Thank you for the question.
And the PM WHO change from 10 to 5. What do you think about that?
Well, I mean, that would require a change. So this is why we in the TAIL refer to the existing guidelines and documents. And the purpose for that is that we don't have to change it because we think that it should be changed, but it's because it's changed by the other body that is actually responsible for doing this. So yes, of course, the new version of tail should contain the new parameters or new levels of the WHO. Although the WHO defines the 4 steps towards getting to the new levels, so it will be the gradual process, perhaps. At that moment, we can remain at the levels that are in the previous version, and then in few years, probably we should modify to the levels that are expected to be reached in the years to come.
Okay, thank you. Gru asks, there's been a boom in the availability of indoor air quality measurement devices for the consumer market, for example, AirThings. I think we've probably seen all of these things advertised that measure standard air quality parameters. How reliable do you think these devices are?
Well, I think it's absolutely fascinating to see that there's so many sensors available, and then they illustrate invisible information. I believe they are reliable, but we need to have some sort of a framework that will describe what they actually show, and then the results are comparable. So basically, each of those, they will develop their own framework that they would use, and we don't want to have those different frameworks. Some of those sensors are probably less reliable, and it's difficult for me to compare which is the best, and I really don't know. I know some of the information, but I don't want to say which are better, which are worse. The biggest problem is carbon dioxide, because it requires a calibration or zero calibration from time to time, and that may create any information that is incorrect. Then the other problem is the use of TVOC sensors. TVOC sensors, they are supposed to measure total concentration of volatile organic compounds in the space, but we really don't know what they actually measure. Most of those sensors would measure the levels of alcohol, such as ethanol and so on, which are prevalent because we humans emit a lot of high levels of ethanol, independently of whether we had alcohol consumption or not. So basically, that would be 2 problems. The third problem of the numerous sensors or methods for measurements, this is low cost, would be that there is no protocols on how and where, on how to place those sensors in the space and where to measure those levels. So that the placement can actually, again, influence the actual measurement, actual exposure levels.
Sure, thanks. And then kind of following on from that, David asked, have you built your own monitor measuring all of the parameters mentioned?
We are building it, and we haven't been finishing it yet. It's not that easy, you need to have all the process of calibrations and so on. It's been a long process. We are developing it, and then in the end, what we will probably propose is a combination of the sensors of the methods that already are deployed on the market. So say, just give an example, maybe combining AirThings with, I don't know, Atmo Cube or something like this, or any other type of sensors that are available, And then once tail has been demonstrated to be, useful in that present format, then probably it will naturally develop. This kind of sensors will be naturally developed and available.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. Christina asks, kind of states, I believe the AccuBat tool calculates sound insulation. How do you extract a predicted SPL rating from this? And she notes that she's skeptical about SPL being the only acoustic metric for IAQM, as there are many others which are relevant to well-being.
I completely agree with this. And what can I say? I'm looking forward to the acoustic groups to develop a better method and better descriptors of the effects of acoustic environment on humans. Here, what we talk about is the speech transmission index or any other metrics that would be very, very useful in that context. The levels of sound pressure levels above 50 dBA or 55 dBA, which can create problems for health, are seldom occurring in buildings, actually. So we have to have a better metric there, but that is something to be developed, hopefully, in the coming years.
Yeah, a bit of a call to action there for acoustic
yes, exactly.
groups. Yeah.
I know that there are groups that are developing this, and there are the groups that actually develop information about this, but it has not been, generally available, and also not many people know about it. It's easy to measure the sound pressure level, but how useful it is, I completely agree. It was Christina, I believe. So that it's just sort of a vintage, sort of, I would say, marker of the acoustic problems in buildings.
Great. And then got another question from Pete. On an early slide of the air quality map of Europe, he was surprised to see that the air quality was green in southern Poland, with coal air pollution being such a problem there. Was the map of Europe showing indoor or ambient air quality, and what is causing this discrepancy?
No, it was, I don't know, it was just an example. I agree. Maybe that was the map from, the summertime. I don't know.
Okay, great. And then from Chetters, we've got British Standard 40102 from the British Standards Institute is a new standard that covers the evaluation of a building's health and well-being and indoor environmental quality. So not a question there, but maybe something.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
I'd like to. Yeah, I will have to have a look into it. I know that there are developments. It's not that it's something that we are the only one. I know that there are other groups that are also developing that.
And got a thanks from Ken, from Dr. Ken. The inclusion of biological parameters will ensure a complete air quality assessment so as not to leave any residuals behind. And a thanks for the presentation as well.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Cool. I think that's all of our questions, and we are over time. So I'll just say thanks once again to. That's all right. Thanks to Pavel. Thank you for presenting. I know it can be also a bit weird when you can't see all the attendees on the screen, but we've had nearly 100 people attend today. So I'm sure they would say thank you very much as well.
Thank you for joining me. And if you have any other questions or comments, please send them to my email. I'll be happy to address them. And also, if you could send me the number of this British standard, I would also like to have a look at this. But I hope, it's, again, I want to repeat, it's just I would like to raise the interest. I believe that my mission is not to basically say, well, it should be tailed, but it's basically we need to have some sort of a rating scheme, and that we agreed on and we start to use it. And if we have it, then it will be a great success, and basically for all of us.
Yeah, thank you. And if we have more time, I definitely would love to talk more about how we can just raise awareness of indoor air quality more general, and obviously tail is one suggested way of doing that. But
exactly,
that's quite an
just
important issue.
Show people how the risks when you enter the building, and if you know that you see, for example, the sprinkler system, you say, okay, I'm safe in case of fire. But what about if there is some toxic pollutants? Am I safe or am I not safe?
Absolutely. Okay. Well, thank you. That's it from us for today, attendees.
Sure.
Thank you for logging in. I hope you found it all beneficial and informative.